calling templates from other templates. So I'm assuming if you're looking at this topic that you have at least some background with programming, and if you have any background with programming at all, you've likely come across the concept of a function or a subroutine. The idea of a function or a subroutine is that sometimes I execute the same code over and over and over again, and rather than retyping it over and over and over again in the various places where I use it or I need it, I put it in a separate standalone module called a function or a subroutine, and then I call that function or subroutine anytime I need to use the code. It's a way of making code reusable and more easily maintained and modular and insulated from bugs in other code, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very good technique. We use it over and over again. That same technique is allowed inside of transforms, and that technique is in transforms is the call template technique. So we have a command, XSL call template, and templates are like subroutines, and if you haven't sort of gotten that notion yet, start thinking about it that way. If you're a programmer-oriented kind of person, each template is a function, basically, and it returns some text that the interpreter uses to put into the output stream, right? That's kind of how it works. And those templates are put on a stack. So if one template calls another template, just like in any other programming language, the current template, the return place in the current template is put on the stack, and the new template starts executing. Okay, so I won't use, I'm going to jump back out of the programmer language and talk in more general English about what happens. And the function, however, is exactly like what we try to accomplish all the time in programming, which is I have this code, and I want this code to run many different places in many different ways. And furthermore, just like in programming, I want it to run a little bit differently depending on what parameters I give it, what I tell it to do, right? So so a very common parameter to pass a template is an ID, the ID of the element that you want to transform. And if I pass it a different ID, it'll transform a different element. Very useful thing to have. Same code over and over again, doing the same routines, but in different cases it transforms different. In different cases it transforms different elements based on the ID that's passed to it. Okay, so we have this XSL call template command, and the XSL call template command takes the name of the template you want to call as a parameter. Every template can either have a match attribute, and that says if you happen to come across this XPath that's in the match attribute, do this template, or it can have a name. If it has a name, actually I believe it can have both. If it has a name, it will execute when it's called. If it has a match attribute, it'll execute when that match is met. And it's a little more sophisticated than that. I don't want to go into it here. Really, in apply templates, or if you've already consumed the information about apply templates, that's where you'll go into what match equals and why that works, and under what circumstances that match will be checked. Right now, we're talking about the name attribute of an XSL template command. An XSL template command will take either a match or a name attribute. If you put a name attribute in it, then you're saying, I intend to call this template. And then back up in the code that does the calling, you say XSL call template, and then there's a name parameter there, and you match the name in the name parameter of the call template to one of the names that you have chosen to name one of your templates. And that's the way you call the template. Okay, really not very different than the way you do it in programming. You name the function, and then you cite the name when you're calling the function. You name the template, and then you cite the name when you're calling the template. One other thing, how do you pass parameters to the template? You pass parameters through a separate command that's inside the XSL call template command. Inside the XSL call template command, only one thing is allowed, and that's an XSL with param statement. And that XSL with param statement names the parameter and gives it a value. Okay, so you can look up the syntax and play around with that. You'll see it in lots of the examples going forward, but I wanted to introduce it to you here. So on the calling side, inside the XSL call template command goes an XSL with param command, and that XSL with param command passes the parameter, a named parameter value pair, into the transform that's being called. Down there in the transform that's being called, we have an XSL template, just like always, and instead of using a match equals attribute, we use a name equals attribute. We give it a name in the name attribute, and then directly following the XSL template command, we have an XSL param. The caller uses a with param, and the receiver uses just an XSL param command. And that param command receives the value of the parameter that was passed into the transform, and then from then on, that value that was passed in acts just like a variable. So you access the value of the parameter that was passed in by prepending a $sign. So let me run through one complete example of this. Suppose I'm calling a template, and the template is called render item. And in order to know what item to render, I got to pass it the ID of the item to render. And then inside that template render item is all the code necessary to render that item, right? Let's just say. Okay, so up there in my calling code, I have XSL call template, name equals render item. And then inside that XSL call template command, in a separate element, I have XSL with param, name equals ID. And then you have a select attribute, and you select at ID, right? And that's going to put the ID of the current item into that parameter. Now we go down a ways into our transforms, and this template, by the way, that's called render item, might be in the same XSL file, or might be in an XSL file that's included in the current XSL file. But one way or the other, it has to be accessible. Otherwise, there's an error. You're trying to call a template that can't be found, right? And Oxygen, by the way, will flag that error for you and tell you that you can't do that. So you have in the somewhere else in your stream of templates, either in the same XSL file or in another XSL file that's included, you have an XSL template, name equals render item. And then directly following that XSL template command, as a child of the XSL template command, you have an XSL param, name equals ID, and you don't have to say the value because the value will come in. Okay, so now inside my called template, render item, I now have an ID available to me, and I can start off the code with an XSL for each item where ID equals $ID, right? I'm citing or referencing that ID by putting a $sign before its name. Okay, so try that out, play around with it a little bit. Hearing me talk about it is certainly not sufficient to get it. You're going to have to play around with it, look at it in different transforms, but recognize that really all I'm doing is what I've ever done anytime I'm programming, is creating a function and passing that function parameters, and the same thing is true in XML. Now, XSL call templates versus XSL apply templates are very different. XSL call templates works on that name parameter of the template. XSL apply templates works on the match parameter of the template. And so I'll leave it to the XSL apply templates topic to show you that, but they're very close in form, but they're very different in function.